It's no secret, or at least it wouldn't be if you've seen my shonen manga podcast, that I don't care for Bleach. And in the realm of AniTube, that's not an uncommon opinion. Of the big three titles that dominated Weekly Shonen Jump for over a decade, Bleach is widely considered to be the worst. And while I certainly share that sentiment when drawing comparisons to Naruto and One Piece, I'd also argue that Bleach deserves more credit than it gets. Now don't get me wrong, I'm not saying Bleach is complex, hell, I'm not even saying it's good, but it does have a number of well-realized ideas that make it interesting, at the very least. One such example is the way in which Tite Kubo integrates the oh-so-prevalent revenge story. These kinds of plot lines may be a dime a dozen in media as a whole, not just in Weekly Shonen Jump, but perspective can make a world of difference. In this case, Bleach is able to tie three parallel journeys into a single narrative thread that spans three of its biggest arcs: a tale of betrayal, hypocrisy, and toxic self-destruction.
People are all evil. In order to falsely believe yourself to be just, you must inevitably falsely believe that someone else is more evil than you.
Kaname Tosen is a man who hates bloodshed and a man who strives for justice. But what does such an ambiguous term mean to him? After the death of his friend at the hands of a Soul Reaper, Tosen joined the Court Guard and vowed to destroy the Soul Society from within. If such a system had allowed this heinous act to occur without punishing the murderer in kind, surely it could not be just. He believed himself to be carrying on the will of his fallen friend, that being the pursuit of peace by erasing all the world's evil. But all he was really doing was selfishly seeking revenge for his own loss. Tosen is an incredibly hypocritical character, something which is only emphasized by the way Bleach is structured. In one moment, he cries when cutting down Ishida, but when he next shows up, he shows no remorse in attempting to strike down Kenpachi. It's only after Kubo reveals the bigger picture that these seemingly contradictory actions fall into place. The Kenpachi fight in particular stresses Tosen's hatred for violence, the one part of his friend that he actually managed to hang on to. At the same time, however, it also shows just how far removed her perspective is from Tosen's own. While his Shikai reflects the pacifism of his late friend by merely subduing Ishida earlier in the arc, Tosen's Bankai is another matter entirely. This ability deprives Kenpachi of his senses while still allowing him to feel the pain of each attack. A normal man would be left defenseless, forced to suffer a slow, agonizing death as Tosen cut them to ribbons. As for Tosen himself, he gets the opportunity to vent his rage as he maliciously delivers what he believes to be divine retribution. He isn't just okay with killing, he goes out of his way to torture those who he deems to be evil. The Ryoka meant nothing to him, perhaps because they were enemies of the very society Tosen deemed unjust. But Kenpachi was a Soul Reaper, one of the most aggressive Soul Reapers he had met. If all Soul Reapers were inherently evil in Tosen's view, the bloodthirsty Kenpachi would be a culmination of that evil. So in hindsight, it makes sense that Tosen would aim his hatred at Kenpachi over anyone else. Of course, Kenpachi is a monster of battle, so he shrugs off Tosen's Bankai like nothing. But who knows how many victims Tosen had previously passed judgment on? He had obviously strayed far from the virtuous path he believed his friend had once walked. But looking back on their interactions in the past, this was to be expected. While the two clearly had a close connection to each other, Kubo's clever panel layouts highlight a disconnect in their worldviews. The two never meet each other at eye level, and even when they share the same panel, one looks up while the other looks down. Tosen never saw the world the same way his friend did, both literally and philosophically. She hated how the clouds blocked out the stars in the sky, but Tosen liked the clouds. He didn't mind the darkness like she did. He was born in the dark, born without sight. She was his only light, so when she was ripped away from him, he returned to the darkness. He didn't possess the same light of hope within him that she had, so he grasped onto her Zanpakuto in an effort to retain that light, to assure himself that he was carrying on her will no matter the path he walked. By taking on the role of justice incarnate, he allowed himself to transcend moral fault. He could justify murder so long as the victim didn't conform to his concept of virtue. He could justify betrayal so long as it avoided bloodshed. His twisted notion of justice would always bend to suit his behavior, and over time, that drove him to madness. Initially, Tosen formed an assumption about Soul Reapers based on the individual death of his friend, and it was that burning hatred which pushed him to act. An alliance with Aizen gave him an endgame, a concrete plan that would ensure the death of Soul Society. As he carried out that plan, however, his ember of hatred grew weaker and weaker. Life within the Soul Society dulled his edge. Peace, the very thing his friend had been looking for, had made him complacent. He even came to befriend a Soul Reaper in Komamura. Tosen had gotten the chance to experience his friend's dream for himself, the chance to find his own light of hope. And that made him feel guilty. His goal was vengeance. Hatred was his motivation. How would it be fair of him to forget that, and enjoy what his late friend could not? This notion made him fear the loss of his hatred, but as if that wasn't damning enough, he also grew to fear the light of hope she once presented. This change is best shown through Tosen's relationship with Hisagi and the rest of 9th Division. Tosen's teachings were much more indicative of his deceased friend than his actions. When Hisagi asked to be dismissed from his position in the court guard, Tosen stated that the fear of battle is what allows a warrior to properly defend those who also fear battle. If one does not fear battle, they are not fit to wield a sword. Perhaps this was something Tosen truly believed, but it's not hard to see that Tosen was a massive hypocrite. To be an Avenger, he couldn't accept peace. He had to weaponize his hatred. He had to fight the system. His fear of battle was pushed further and further into the background as he continued to separate himself from Soul Society. And eventually, this brought him to a crossroads. A showdown with the disciple he once inspired, and the friend he forced himself to betray. Komamura acts as Tosen's foil. Where Tosen is seemingly pure on the outside, but monstrous on the inside, Komamura is monstrous on the outside, yet virtuous on the inside. Like Tosen, Komamura strives to walk the path of least bloodshed. But where Tosen was motivated by vengeance and hatred, Komamura would raise his sword to protect. His first battle showed him stepping in to save Tosen from Kenpachi. But while Komamura would rather avoid conflict if possible, he's willing to become a beast of battle should the situation call for it. To Komamura, fighting and even killing under the guise of self-defense would not violate his sense of justice. This nature comes up again when he's finally forced to confront Tosen as an enemy. Upon realizing that he and Tosen's motives opposed one another, Komamura was forced to weigh their friendship against the justice Tosen sought to destroy. And although Komamura tried to slay Tosen, he ultimately couldn't bring himself to kill his only friend. Tosen had become the very evil he himself sought to vanquish, the threat to a peace he once fought to achieve. And so he had to be put down by the ideology he had failed to inherit from his late friend. Thus, it was Hisagi, the student of Tosen's pacifist teachings, who was forced to land the death blow. One of the posts I've linked in the description noticed a seeming self-awareness in Tosen's behavior that I find fascinating. Tosen had grown to care for people like Komamura and Hisagi, but if he wanted to exact revenge on Soul Society, he would have to sever those connections. This presumably would have forced him to question his course at one point or another, and because of that, Tosen's actions in the Arrancar saga could be seen as him exaggerating his hatred to the brink of madness. When Komamura calls him depraved, Tosen comments on how such a statement of character is simplistic, for that would lean on the assumption that all Soul Reapers are good and all Hollows are bad. But Tosen himself had been operating under the assumption that all Soul Reapers were bad from the beginning. It's possible that Tosen had become so blind to his own flaws that he just didn't think about it, but I think there's enough evidence to support a different reading. Think of how he cast off his friend Zanpakuto in favor of Hollowification. Think of how he called Komamura ugly after gaining the ability to see. Tosen goes above and beyond to reject his place in Soul Society. But why would he feel the need to do that if he didn't feel like he belonged there? Why would he try so hard to push Komamura away if they were never really friends? Tosen feared his own inner peace. He feared the notion that he wanted to achieve what his late friend could not. So he had to convince himself to reject it. He had to blind himself to his own desires. And that's what tore him apart. Not only did he sacrifice his own life for selfish vengeance, but his death would leave a hole in Komamura's heart as well.
I will continue to fight myself as long as I have the fangs in my heart.
To go back a bit, Sajin Komamura was introduced with a declaration of loyalty to Genryusai Yamamoto. He had been discriminated against for his appearance, but at some point in his life, Yamamoto accepted him when no one else would, and that instilled in Komamura a will to defend the Soul Society. In spite of that, however, Komamura couldn't shake the conditioning of his troubled past. Not only would he cover his face so he could appear more human, but he'd even go so far as to suppress his spiritual pressure to avoid confrontations with people. I wouldn't go so far as to say that he wanted to be a human outright, but he definitely didn't like being othered by society. He wanted to be accepted, to have a place to belong, and that's why people like Yamamoto and Tosen were so important to him. Obviously, a blind man like Tosen wouldn't be put off by Komamura's appearance, but because Tosen had his own reasons to distance himself from Soul Society, it was only natural that he and Komamura would gravitate towards each other as fellow outcasts. During that time, Komamura came to recognize Tosen's hatred of the world, and that made him want to help Tosen love the world again. Even after learning his comrade's true motives, even with the fate of Soul Society, his home hanging in the balance, Komamura couldn't kill Tosen. His emotions prevented him from acting on his sense of justice, and that laid the groundwork for his hypocrisy in the Thousand-Year Blood War. Komamura had said that Yamamoto would have his life should he ever need it, and sure enough, after his savior's death, Komamura sacrificed himself in Yamamoto's name. The problem was that his sacrifice didn't protect anyone. Komamura basically killing himself for a dead man didn't benefit Yamamoto at all, and it certainly didn't contribute to anything he stood for. Hell, Komamura didn't even get to fight the man who killed Yamamoto, just a replaceable lackey. He gave his life for his own selfish vengeance and gained nothing from it. He let his rage blind him, the same thing he had criticized Tosen for doing, and it cost him his humanity. The irony of his final transformation summarized his character arc brilliantly. Before, his monstrous appearance masked his internal virtue, but in the war arc, his human form contained nothing but malice. His interaction with the Great Elder called attention to the way he had formerly rejected his identity, something which was seen as a disgrace to his clan. After Aizen's group defected, Komamura stopped trying to hide that part of himself, but he didn't immediately give in to an animalistic rage either. He had a brief chance to just be who he was, even if the narrative didn't give it much attention. Like Tosen, he had a chance to start over, to defend the justice he once stood for, but in the end, he threw everything away to become a beast of vengeance. Those who do not know what love is liken it to beauty. Those who claim to know what love is liken it to ugliness. Gin Ichimaru is another man who shares striking similarities with Tosen, which makes sense given how quickly the two are linked to each other during Gin's introduction. Both are said to be afraid of dying, but more specifically, they're afraid of dying without fulfilling their vengeful ambitions. Much like Tosen, Gin gets close to and is ultimately undone by the one he wanted to betray. But where Tosen set his sights on an entire system, Gin aimed his malice at one man. Where Tosen was blunt and outspoken, Gin was mysterious and reserved. He worked as Sosuke Aizen's right hand for decades, all the while waiting for an opportunity to strike Aizen down and reclaim what was stolen from his childhood friend Rangiku Matsumoto. This was his life's work, a simple, toxic pursuit that ended in tragedy. Gin started off as a seemingly innocent child living in the slums of Rukongai alongside Matsumoto, but after he caught Aizen and his men taking a piece of Matsumoto's soul, Gin vowed to kill them and create a world where Matsumoto wouldn't have to cry anymore. This eventually brought him into the court guard and into Aizen's good graces, where his hatred would fester. Because of this, Matsumoto was the only one who actually got to see Gin's kinder side before he became warped by malice. Each was the closest connection the other had, and it's heavily implied that the two shared some sort of mutual love. The poem from Volume 20 seems to detail the evolution of Gin's relationship with Matsumoto, but it's important to keep in mind that these poems are often conveyed from the cover character's perspective. As was the case with Tosen, Hisagi, and Komamura earlier. They not only serve to give insight on said characters, but they're also indicative of any biases each character holds. In this case, Gin first implies that his love for Matsumoto was once simple and beautiful, but as time went on, that love eventually led him to vengeance, something much uglier. However, the usage of claim to know might also imply a disagreement from Gin's perspective. Others may see such love as ugly, but to Gin, going above and beyond to protect that love wasn't selfish, it was selfless, in a really twisted way. The Curious Cat post I'm borrowing this observation from referenced the two scenes late into the Arrancar saga where Gin took note of Ichigo's eyes. The first was when Ichigo lost hope, something which made Gin lose interest in him. The second was after Ichigo had accepted himself and was willing to throw everything away to defeat Aizen. something which regained Gein's trust. To Gein, conviction was what mattered most. So as long as he stayed true to himself, his love would always be beautiful. No matter how ugly he himself became, that ugliness would never taint his love for Matsumoto. And I guess that's cool for him, but the narrative certainly doesn't reward his behavior. The most obvious symbol of his toxic narrow-mindedness is his Bankai, literally a poisonous blade that extends in a single direction. Gein was no hero. Like Tosen with the Soul Society, Gein's environment changed him. But where Tosen's edge was dulled, Gein's became sharper. His isolation made him cold and vindictive, to the point where he actually enjoyed toying with people. For example, his interaction with Rukia before her impending execution was in no way beneficial to his quest to kill Aizen. He simply enjoyed seeing her suffer. That's the kind of snake he had grown into. At some point, Gein reached a depth he couldn't return from, and he knew it. The sad thing is, his course of action was entirely unnecessary to begin with.
It is not frightening to know misfortune. What is frightening is to know lost happiness will never come back again.
The complementary poems in volumes 46 and 47 provide a tragic closure to this complicated relationship. The first implies that Matsumoto would have recovered from her misfortune regardless of whether or not Gein avenged her. Because he chose to take the actions he took, though, the two of them were never able to share the same happiness they once did. Gein disappeared on his murder quest and left Matsumoto in the dark. But somewhere along the way, he seemed to realize his mistake. When she crossed Aizen's path in Karakura Town, Gein made it a point to drag her away despite Aizen's assurance that she wasn't being a hassle. Gein wanted to ensure not only that her life was safe, but also that she stayed out of his business. He didn't want to drag her down to hell with him, or break her heart if he died, so he went out of his way to sever their bond by insulting her and knocking her out. Sadly for him, that didn't entirely work. He kept her alive, but he had to spend his final moments watching her cry, something his entire journey was intended to prevent. Not much of a happy ending for the venomous snake boy. And if I wanted to rub more salt on the wound, I could talk about how, if Gein had done nothing, Ichigo would have taken care of Aizen himself. Not that Gein would have known that after their last interaction. All his dramatic stand against Aizen amounted to was a mere footnote in Aizen's ascendance. The weight of his vengeance was too heavy to bear alone, and in the end, it didn't even matter. If you became a snake tomorrow and began devouring people, if you roared your love for me with that mouth you used to devour people, could I still say that I love you as I do today? I don't see myself making another Bleach video after this, because then I'd have to go back and reread it all to get all the panels I need. So, what other hot takes do I want to signal boost while I have you here? Soul Society's overrated, Fullbring is underrated, Ulquiorra is a good character, Hitugai is pretty boring, Tatsuki should have been a main character, and Kubo should draw a low-stakes slice-of-life comedy. And now, for a word from today's sponsor. What? I got a sponsor? What? Tired of experiencing an existential crisis every time you look around at things that no longer represent you? Wait, no, that's probably too specific. Tired of dealing with frail posters? Straining yourself to reach high places because you're too short? Having to peel those tiny strips of tape off because they just won't unstick? Introducing Displates. These thick metal plates ensure that your favorite designs won't get ripped, torn, or any other version of the word. Plus, they attach to the wall using strong magnets, so you won't have to worry about any pesky tape or push pins like this poor sap. Here's what our satisfied customers had to say. Well, they sponsored me for a video, so I kinda had to.
Oh yeah, man, Displates are wonderful. I love having the ability to switch them around without going through the hassle of hanging a normal poster. I'm also a fan of how they commission and credit their artists instead of just stealing it off the internet like some other companies do for t-shirts or whatever. I found this Sasuke image and thought the art style looked cool, so I decided to browse the artist gallery and see what other stuff they had. It's pretty awesome, man.
There's a variety of designs from anime, manga, video games, and more. If you're interested in getting a Displate for your home, click the link in the description and use the promo code MATHWIZ15 for a 15% discount. Please, it's tax season.
I gotta give the government money, or they'll come for my screen caps of cute anime girls. You gotta help.
Wow, I got a sponsorship. I'm a real YouTuber now. I that's another check off the list. I did it. I'm a real YouTuber now. Yeah, thanks to all the people who lent their voices for the line reads or the poems. I guess that's a thing that's hip with the kids nowadays, is doing the crossover line reads. So we got that going. That was fun. I managed to get out 2 videos in a single month for the first time in a while. I mean, like, December, I guess, counts because I did the YouTube list, but that was really low effort, so I don't count it. This was like 2 fully scripted, fully edited anime videos. So I'm getting back on track. I can do it. Oh, man, let's go. I didn't script this part, so I'm just going off the cuff. I guess we'll catch you the next time for a video. Bye.